Hello. I feel strange recording this sitting in the isolation of my home office using fancy backgrounds uh, because this exchange feels simultaneously distant and intimate. It feels distant because we were supposed to meet in person, to come together in physical proximity, to share space and time, to be close enough to give an epidemiologist nightmares. And it also feels intimate because I myself am recording this late in the night in a part of my home that nobody ever enters, and perhaps see streaming to you on devices that are personal and in spaces that are private. I don't know what other tabs you have open on your laptop right now. I don't know what was the last thing you saw on your phone. In many ways, the experience of the global pandemic has made us understand that intimacy is dangerous, it's threatening. And despite all our claims and cravings for proximity, we have all immediately accepted that touch is dangerous and distance is a pathology. There has been a renewed interest and excitement about what constitutes human intimacy. It has become a scarce resource, an aspirational form, a promise that we see as the exit out of these lockdowns, and the hope that we hold on to in times when we feel lonely. Digital technologies have often been offered as an answer to these questions, right? Because we are not only physically distant, uh, we are only physically distant, not socially. Because we continue to connect on all our digital media platforms, our screens becoming our restaurants, cafes, bars, offices, and dating grounds. We might be separated in space, but we reach out in time, converging in the digital clouds to make sure that we might be isolating but not distancing. The digital has appeared to us as messianic, the savior that shall allow us to hold on to being intimate and connected even in times of extreme alienation. The techno-utopists have given us Disneyfied ideas of how digital solutions keep us alive, keep our economies running, our children in education, and our families and friends connected. Digital technologies, it would seem, are the delivery mechanisms of human intimacy. The idea of being connected, a phrase often used for online access, has never been so revered. However, as we allow for this glorification of the connected technologies to allow for interaction and intimacy, replacing touch with touch screens, there is a need to pause and realize that these technologies are not just delivery mechanisms. They are deeply involved in shaping and controlling the parameters of what is intimate, who gets to be intimate, and what are the punishments for those who will not, cannot, and would not participate in these technological events. I want to present to you a feminist, post-colonial, queer approach that complicates both the idea of desirable intimacy and of technological framings of our bodies. And in order to do that, I'm going to boil down intimacy to the action of touch. I want to explore with you three formulations of touch as we examine how technology and intimacy both are states of privilege, power, and pathology. And that while we continue to calibrate our quest for digital intimacies, it's important to question, critique, and recognize those who might not be able to suffer the unbearable lightness of being intimate. And I'm going to do it through three different stories. The first one is about the strangeness of touch. Because we touch in order to be touched, we touched and are touched. There is reciprocity in it, there is desire in it, but there is also the extraordinary negotiations of agency, purpose, intention, and familiarity in it. That's why there is such a thin line between I'm touched by your presence and I touch myself in your presence. The one refers to an emotional movement, a transfer into a different state of being to become something else at that moment of impact. The other refers to a perverted sexual display where touching myself becomes a predatory, masturbatory act that makes others feel vulnerable or attacked. One of the most influential philosophical mediations to think through the idea of touch and intimacy is through the work of the British feminist philosopher and activist Sara Ahmed. Ahmed, in her extraordinary book, The Promise of Happiness, introduces to us the figure of the feminist killjoy, the person who deviates from the norms and kills the joy or happiness, in our case, of touching. The example that Ahmed uses is very specific, but it will have resonances for many of us. Throw your mind back to the last big family gathering, Christmas, a wedding, somebody's anniversary, an outing. Remember a social occasion where all the higgledy-piggledy collection of relatives came together to be happy, to be intimate, to be a family. In that moment, at that space, it is given that we will be physically proximate and intimately touching. In that moment of touching and being touched, Ahmed says, it is clear that you shall be happy. And whether you want it or not, happiness is the promise of that intimacy. Now try and remember the time when you had to sit next to an uncle who always touches you that much longer to make you uncomfortable. Or the cousin who makes inappropriate comments about your body. Or the aunt who shames you for your sexuality. These are all characters who insist on making you uncomfortable through physical touch, through how they see you, and through words and semi-disguised abuses. They continue to touch you in ways that make you feel vulnerable and violated. You sit there, and despite the anger, the inconvenience, the increasing frustration, you smile. You smile at the touch that makes your flesh creep. You smile at the stare that weighs you down. You smile at the malice that breaks you. Because you know that in that moment of being intimate, you are supposed to accept that you shall be touched. Now imagine what would happen if things were more deviating from the script. If you were trans or queer with a history of abuse, or married into the family with a different religion or skin, if you don't look right, sound right, feel right, act right, speak right. And all these not right things become the basis upon which these intimate strangers interact with you. You leave these occasions drained, angry, hating yourself. And yet, while it's happening, you will not call it out. You will smile. You will be happy. Because intimacy is that imaginary framework where happiness resides. And if you are not happy, if you call out the misogyny, the bigotry, the xenophobia, the racism, the homophobia, the religion bashing, and the political conviction of the people that touch you, you're going to be called what Ahmed calls a killjoy. If you look at that uncle and ask him not to touch your ass or grope you, nobody's going to look at him or ask him much. But you can be sure your parents will ask you why you have to be such a killjoy. If somebody is indulging in xenophobic comments about immigrants and people of color, and you tell them not to say it because it's racist, people are going to ask you to loosen up, to not take things too seriously, to learn how to take a joke. Ahmed's point is really very simple. Intimacy doesn't come with a promise, but a demand of happiness. The promise of intimacy is a threat. It will be demanded of you to participate in that intimacy, whether you like it or not. And then the price that you will pay in order for this demand is that you will stifle who you are and participate in the rituals of intimacy. And in return, there will be resources, affordances, and support that will be given to you in the form of happy families who will look after you in times of need. The thresholds of participation and the means of participation into intimacy are extremely high, especially for queer and trans folk who are often alienated from their own bodies and distanced from the experience of their sexuality, experimenting with the blurred boundaries of their sexual expression. This is an all too familiar story. Because even in the online spaces, where we might be able to connect with the people that we want to, There are very strict measures involved in how you present yourself as capable of and worthy of intimacy. It's already a given that for many trans and queer folk whose families are the adopted families that they build, often because of ostracization from their birth families, when they come out, the digital has been a platform of finding intimacy. Social media platforms like Facebook become ways of reaching out to other trans folks, to connect with support groups, and to also find love and desire with others who share their orientation. However, in 2017, Facebook decided to implement a real name policy that blocked the name of trans users and drag queens and suspended their accounts. Not only did this stop their access to an emotional connection and social intimacy, it also reinforced the idea that their entire process of coming out, of building their new bodies and identities, their networks and persona are all disqualified and invalidated against the measure of the name that they were given and the sexual tag that they were assigned at birth. The same goes for people who, for reasons of privacy, safety, or personal security, are unable to use their real names to participate in the promise of social intimacy that the digital technologies have to offer. So this is my first proposition for us, to be cautious of celebrating intimacy, to be aware that participating in intimacy requires you to be a certain kind of person and has potentials for abuse, to realize that digital technologies mimic and amplify the conditions and controls of who we touch, who touches us, and how we are touched by human and non-human actors. Thank you.